Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Rachel Orlansky and I'm the Director of Student Affairs at Ashford University. And I'll be the host of this session, Understanding Wellness in Higher Education Faculty, a comparison of learning environments. Your microphones will be muted for this presentation, but I encourage you to put questions in the chat and comments in the chat, and also keep your eye out for a feedback survey link that I'll be dropping in the chat throughout this session. So now I'm pleased to introduce you to Cara Metz and Dr. Sarah Jarvie. Take it away.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. So Sarah, Dr. Jarvie, and I have been working on some research, just trying to understand wellness and burnout a little bit better. So we wanted to share a little bit about what we have learned from some of our preliminary research. All right, so a little bit about us. Both of us graduated from the University of Cincinnati in counselor education. We have taught or are teaching in master's level counseling programs. We've done so on ground, hybrid, and online. So that's kind of where we got a kickstart for this presentation, knowing the differences in the different environments that you teach in. Our background is very person-centered focused, and that's really where our experiences come into play from our master's program. And both of us have, over a decade worth of experience in the counseling.
So why study wellness? Well, there's a lot of factors, but basically what prompted us into specifically thinking about this study is Cara and I have known each other for a long time. We actually met while in graduate school. And so in kind of thinking about that, as well as now both being professors, about what does it mean for wellness and burnout in terms of education. And then specifically, we started talking about it. What does it mean for online educators? And I have recently transitioned from, I was teaching fully in person, and now I teach fully online. For the same university, I just, my roles have switched. And so comparing, like, in talks that we've done with each other, comparing that. And as counselors, we focus a lot on wellness in terms of thinking about that with our clients. And so as counselor educators, we start to encourage students to really think about what they're doing for self-care in order to avoid burnout, which then got us thinking about, like, how much do we really practice what we preach, right? As educators, are we employing wellness strategies with ourselves like we encourage our students to do? And so in looking at the literature, there were very little studies that really looked at wellness and burnout of those who teach primarily online. And so we thought we would conduct a study kind of trying to compare and contrast location of employment. So seeing if that was an impact or like a significant factor in wellness, seeing if someone who was working primarily in person versus online. And granted, this was all started pre-COVID. So I think a lot of factors, especially in the past 8 months, have changed, since now so many universities are not meeting in person. But when this study was originally started, that was kind of our thought process.
So, but we wanted to take that a little bit further, because a lot of the research out there just looks at burnout, just kind of that factor alone. But we wanted to know, when looking at wellness, what could we do to look at wellness and burnout from a more ecological model. So not just looking at the microsystems that we're involved in, but looking all the way up to the chronosystem. Which means in the university realm, it could be that we're looking at tenure and university politics. And so when we were looking for an instrument to give to our participants, we really wanted to find something that would take a look at all the factors that impact our own burnout and our own wellness. And so that's kind of where we started our research, with looking at this from the ecological model.
So for our pilot study, we sent out a survey through a counselor education listserv for the pilot, and we got 48 responses, which, you know, as a pilot, I guess that's okay. And most participants were actually on ground, all identified as a counselor educator, meaning they're teaching for a program that is a master's in counseling program, or also it has a doctoral in counseling education component as well. We had a combination of full-time and adjunct professors, and then participants taught in a variety of, so we had on ground, online, and then hybrid programs.
So let's look at some of the interesting results that we came to from a result of this small study. So some interesting findings. We didn't find a significant difference between the various places that you do teach, but it was approaching significance. So as we go further into this study and collect more participants and have a more equal ground based on the environment that they teach, we're thinking that maybe this will be more significant. And we find that hybrid faculty actually tend to have the highest level of burnout. And then if we look just with online faculty, some interesting findings come out. It seems as though people who teach online find that they have lower contradictory demands. They feel like the things that are done well, and they don't need to be changed. They don't need to be done differently compared to people who are teaching on ground. And they don't feel like things are done needlessly. So again, these are significant findings that stood out with online faculty compared to those people who are on ground or hybrid. So then if you want to look at some of the significant factors that influence burnout, some of the things that came through in the study would be having an uneven workload. So, you know, maybe sometimes you just really don't have much to do, you're just doing your teaching, and then all of a sudden you have, 100 different projects that are due yesterday. So you go from 0 to 60 very quickly. Other influences, being put in emotionally disturbing situations. So this might not be the case with teaching everywhere, but in counseling specifically, because we do have internship processes and we're dealing with clients and suicide, a lot of times faculty in the counseling departments will actually be introduced to a lot of emotionally disturbing situations. But we all have this. Our students go through a lot as they're working on their education. And so a lot of times we'll be introduced to this by our students. Other factors that influence burnout would be not receiving enough information to do their assigned work, not knowing what's expected of you or what you're responsible for, so having these ambiguous job descriptions. So if you have good development opportunities, it tends to lower burnout. And that could be either the university providing those development opportunities or giving time to do that. Again, with counseling, we have licenses. We often have to keep up with what's going on in the field and keep up CEUs. And so we often have to do a lot of development, not only through education, but also for our counseling license. Supervisors who are good at solving conflicts often are a great way to influence burnout in a positive direction to decrease it, and just having good health. So then we want to discuss what are some of the implications for these results that we have found.
So If we're thinking about implications for practice and, if you're thinking about maybe your own practice as a faculty member, right? Because while we surveyed counselor educators, I think this has reached farther, not just counselor educators, but I think something to think about is setting out clear expectations for faculty. So, I think there are some institutions that do this really well and have very clear, expectations, either with handbooks or guidance or mentors or something. And so, being able to give enough details to decrease the ambiguity that may come with those expectations. I think sometimes it's hard to know, especially if you're only working from home, what are my expectations? I'm doing everything at home. I'm, having all my meetings here, and, I'm not necessarily going into an office for that. Creating a steady workload for faculty. So thinking through, like Cara had mentioned, I think sometimes, there are periods where you're really busy. I'm thinking like sometimes midterms or end of the semester, there's a lot of grading, there's a lot of things, projects or things that are going on. And then there's times where it's like, okay, I don't really have a lot to do. So, thinking about how can we create more of a steady workload for faculty. I'm not saying that I have answers for this. These are just some things that we've thought about as what can be implications to kind of maybe decrease this burnout. Working to clearly outline role expectations for projects and regular work. I think for both, individual and part of programs or committees, or, are there clear expectations for you on, how you're giving back to that, giving your time to meetings or to projects. Being able to have opportunities or time for development, for professional development. I think as educators, we're always wanting to learn more, learn more strategies, to better our teaching or to better whatever discipline that we're in, so that we can infuse that into our teaching. And so having those opportunities, being given time to step away, to attend things like conferences or trainings or other things that kind of give back to us, so then we can then infuse that into our teaching. Encouraging good health practices, allowing time for doctor's appointments, or, just encouraging a better balance of work life and home life, incorporating exercise into your life. Just maybe think of your own kind of work-life balance. In looking at myself over the past couple years, and especially over the, past how many months that I've been primarily working from home, thinking about, am I setting up good expectations for myself in terms of, having, my work time that's separate from my home life time. And I think for those of us that do teach online, right, I think the lines can be blurred a little bit more for that, because we are working from home and we don't have that, set commute to the office to then, do our work time and then come home. Those boundaries are a little more diffused. So those are just some things that maybe you can think about. I'd love to hear any questions or comments or, things that are going on in your mind as we're kind of presenting some of this information in the chat. If you have any questions for us or other comments, or, just thinking about yourself and how, you're approaching your work-life balance. Have you experienced times of burnout? Maybe what was going on that kind of maybe increased that burnout a little bit, because I think there's periods of time where, we can or at least for myself, I kind of noticed myself feeling a little more burned out. And so, then I start to put some things into place. So for example, for me, that often looks like, okay, setting better boundaries for like emails, right? So not working and always checking my emails on the weekends, and kind of setting up some other expectations for myself.
Well, and as we move through these implications and as we're going to gather more data, I think this is really important to note that burnout is just not something that we deal with as an individual, but it's something that we can deal with even at a university level. So there's lots of things that can go on to help our faculty to increase their wellness, decrease their burnout. I did a lot of research on this many years ago, and I mean, it's millions and millions of dollars that we lose based on just health alone. And you know that burnout is that mental and that physical health. And so if we can start to shift that and do things that are really going to create an environment for wellness, I think that's really important to do as a university. So questions, comments, since I'm sharing my screen, I can't see the comment box.
So far, there's been no questions posed in the chat,
Okay.
but I'll let you know.
And we really we have a lot of ideas of expanding this research. We would like to take it further than just counselor educators. There's only been 2 studies as of last year that compared the environment that you teach in. And so being able to expand the study to include, all faculty, I think would be really interesting to see what that looks like. And then we also have many ideas of other factors that could impact burnout, especially with regarding your environment that you teach in.
We have some questions popping up. And so Prairie asks, I wonder if one of the ways to avoid burnout is to alternate classes that instructors are assigned to teach, as opposed to assigning instructors the same class again and again.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And because, I think on one hand, it's nice to teach the same thing, right? Because you kind of have a set way of doing it. And, you have your strategies in place and assignments and all that. But on the other hand, yeah, I think we can get kind of burned out teaching the same thing over and over again, semester after semester. And so I think, having some, being given a new class to have, new reading and just, some other creativity around it, I think could be a great idea. So yeah, great.
Yeah, she responded after, while that strategy might initially seem like it helps avoid burnout, teaching the same course can really wear on teachers, which I think is what you just spoke to.
Mm-hmm.
We have another, Michael, fascinating study results. Was it just hybrid and online, or were there brick and mortar classroom teachers too?
It was all 3, on-ground, hybrid, and online. Most of our participants were on ground. And so as we further our research, we're really hoping to diversify that a little bit more to get some better results.
But thanks for that question. Yeah.
And I think we found it really interesting because Sarah was talking a little bit about sometimes it's really tough when you're working online to separate work and life because it all happens in the same environment. And so what we were really expecting was to see that online educators actually had greater burnout factors than other faculty. And so we were really surprised with the hybrid coming through to really have that approaching significant result of having a greater burnout than on ground or online.
Any other questions? We're happy to.
I'm not seeing questions in the chat, but thought I'd share too. I have counselors working on my team who've transitioned obviously to working 100% from home. And it's been very interesting to watch burnout. And we've had a lot of conversations about that. How part of it is we're dealing with very heavy conversations and it's now infiltrating our personal spaces. And so what are we doing to, take care of ourselves? And those of us who are still getting dressed for work and changing clothes and just doing things that we used to do in an office or on the campus, right, that help kind of take care of ourselves in those counseling roles. So my team are not teachers, but share a lot of the same, I think, stressors and burnout that folks on your study may have felt.
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting too, because one of the big things that we stress in counseling programs is not to take your work home with you. So what happens when you're at home when you're doing your work, which sounds silly, but there's a representation there that I think is really important.
I'm not sure if you two are seeing the chat now, probably because the screen is gone, but great presentation, working on a dissertation on teacher wellness and the types of professional development practices that can reduce burnout. And then for me, burnout occurs when I think that every student email has to be answered in the moment it comes in. Since we're home more now, it might feel like we have to be so immediately responsive to students, which as someone in student affairs, let me tell you, is only perpetuating a problem for students.
Yes, that's a great point. I think, and I think we put more pressure on ourselves to do that, right? To, something came in, like I have to respond, instead of, like I was saying, like office hours, like now that I work from home, my office hours are completely different than when I was teaching, at our campus here where I live in Colorado Springs. And so yeah, I think, there's a greater propensity for burnout when we place those expectations on ourselves, or then we get feedback, and usually that feedback for me comes through a course evaluation that says, Dr. Jarvie didn't immediately respond to my, emails. And then, then that kind of perpetuates that cycle of, okay, well now I want to get my course evaluations back up. So now I need to answer all those emails immediately when they come in. And so, I think, yeah, it's trying to create some sort of balance for yourself. And, I think balance is hard. And I think, especially over the past 8 months, there's many people that have really learned or had to relearn what that balance looks like and how can I create a balance for myself. I'm thinking back to the beginning, back to March, beginning of the pandemic, when both of my husband and I are working from home. And, no babysitter for the baby. And so it's like, okay, whose meeting is more important at this point? So, you can kind of tag team the baby. But yeah, I think there's realities that, we've had to kind of accept over these last 8 months.
And Pray, that's a great point. It is about setting boundaries, and maybe that's also why in our results that hybrid looked a little bit different with the burnout, because they are, teaching from both home and on ground. And so some of those areas get blurred when you're working fully from home. It's, being able to set those strict boundaries up. For example, I have an office, and I'm not in it now, but most of the time that's where I do my work. And after I'm done with work, you shut the door and I try not to look at it. And that's my boundary for myself. Or, after this amount of time or this time of day, I'm not going to answer emails. I need that time for myself. And so that might be why some of those results are occurring, just because we might be better at setting those boundaries because we have to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, how many of us have smartphones, right? That, I have my work email on there. And so it's really easy for me to look down and be like, oh, I have, 5 emails and, open them up when I could. And at times I'm better than this than others. I'm one of those people that I don't like seeing any sort of notifications in my phone. And so, I have to practice really good boundaries with that of like, trying to not go in there to, clear out so I have no emails, that bothers me, but so I think, part of this study, and because it's a survey, right? So we can't necessarily go back and ask participants other questions. I think it would be really interesting to do kind of a qualitative aspect of this as well and have interviews and really get to know more about, some of the questions of, okay, well, why did you answer it this way and things like that. But with a survey, an anonymous survey, we don't really have that advantage or, that aspect. So, if we're thinking future studies, I think personally that's something that I would like to do because I think sometimes surveys miss that personal component where, especially those in the hybrid, that may have indicated in some of the questions that there are higher rates of burnout, trying to ask follow-up questions. And probably part of this is also my counselor coming in, the counselor role of me coming in of, wanting to find out more about that individual and why they would respond that way. But, I think there's just, and so we'll probably do a second study to follow up with this so we can ask and have some of those personal conversations.
Well, thank you both so much. I think it's fascinating that you started this research before the pandemic and how, it might have changed over time now that folks who are on ground are teaching remotely. And, I'd be curious how your research, goes from here. So thank you, Cara and Sarah, so much. And thank you to our audience for taking some time to participate in today's session. We hope you'll take a moment to complete the survey. I've dropped the link a bunch of times in the chat today in hopes that you'll click on it. Also want to encourage you to attend our next featured presentation, which is tomorrow at 9 a.m. Pacific. Our Center for Women's Leadership and our Forbes School of Business and Technology is presenting. Of course, you can access all of our presentations on our Eventbrite site and continue to follow us on social media, #AUTLC. Enjoy the rest of TLC and thank you so much for coming today.